Today's message. Part 1. This is maybe a repeat for some of you, but you need to hear it again, I think. The executive branch of the United States government was skillfully hijacked in 1976 by members of the Trilateral Commission to gain control of the global economic policymaking apparatus. I'm going to talk about that in some detail. Number 2, we're going to talk about the Obama years. Looking forward to the next 4 years, try to get some insight on what might be headed, where we might be headed. And then part 3, I'm going to give you some market observations, which many of you are pretty keen on. I made some rather astounding forecasts last August that almost all of which have come true within just percentage points. Now the stock market's fallen, gold has fallen, the dollar has risen, and so on. So I'll catch up to date on some market observations. Currently, there's some good news there. There's more good news today than there was in August and July, I guarantee you. So first, let's start out talking about about the Trilateral Commission. What is this organization? It's not a government commission. It's not a public body. It's a private organization. It was founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And it originally had 284 members. They were called from North America, Europe, and Japan. That's where the word tri comes from, the 3 geographic areas. From America, from the United States, there were approximately 100 original members. I think it was 94. And there was a few from Canada in the original membership. But the membership still only runs about 350 or less. And the geographic makeup is the same today as it was when it started. The stated goal of the Trilateral Commission in 1973 was to create a new international economic order. And you have to understand this to understand where we are today, because these are the perpetrators, these are the people who have brought us the international economic order that is broken today, virtually beyond repair. Now you say, well, who needs a new, international economic order? Richard Gardner wrote a paper in 1974 called The Hard Road to World Order. He was a member of the Trilateral Commission, by the way. And he said, in short, the House of World Order would have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. It will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James' famous description of reality, but an end run around national security, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Now, this was not marching orders for all of the Trilateral Commission, I have to say, because he didn't write this for the Trilateral Commission. But this, nevertheless, very clearly represented the philosophy of many members of the Trilateral Commission, that their goal was to erode national sovereignty piece by piece from the bottom up, and as an end run, if you will, and that the end of it would be the House of World Order, that is the new international world order. Now, Zbigniew Brzezinski, again, wrote a pilot book in 1972, right before the founding, called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And he said in his book, remember he's a co-founder, the nation-state as a fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation-state. And so we've seen this in practice so very clearly in the past decade especially, where the international banks and the multinational corporations like the Exxons and the General Motors and the GEs and so on, they have indeed been acting and planning in terms that basically make the nation state obsolete. And there's a great struggle going on right now between these two entities. Brzezinski's rather prophetic statement back in '72 was that, quote, the technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Now, this is where we find ourselves today in a very real way. We are dominated by an elite, and that includes our president-elect, Barack Obama, and they are unrestrained by what we would view as traditional values. Now, James Earl Carter was the first case in point of a trilateral-sponsored president. 1976, he won the election by a landslide. He was introduced originally by Nelson Rockefeller in May of 1973 to his brother, David Rockefeller, and he was picked and tutored then by Zbigniew Brzezinski to become the President of the United States. Everything he learned about foreign policy and, of course, domestic policy as well, he learned from Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski has since written openly about this and is proud of it. Carter was made a member of the Trilateral Commission early on in 1973, and his campaign was financed heavily by members of the Trilateral Commission and their friends. The press also adopted him as their darling child, especially places like Time magazine, where his picture appeared on the cover. And the campaign slogan that Jimmy Carter adopted was, "I will never lie to you." Some of you old-timers remember that. On the other hand, that's all he did. That was a lie. It started with a lie, and it was all he did to us for the next several years. And, of course, he was elected by a landslide in 1976, much in the same way, landslide that Barack Obama was elected this year. The result of this election of James Earl Carter was that he swept in 30% of the U.S. membership of the Trilateral Commission to senior positions in his administration. 30%. In other words, that was about 20-plus members out of 80, 84, 90 members. And I'm just going to show you a few of these so that you have an idea of what I'm talking about. His vice president, Walter Mondale, was a member. Brzezinski was a member, was appointed the National Security Advisor. There was Michael Blumenthal as Secretary. There was Cyrus Vance as Secretary of State. Harold Brown as Secretary of Defense. James Schlesinger, Secretary of Energy. Elliot Richardson, Delegate to Law of the Sea. And here's an interesting one. Leonard Woodcock, one of the most prominent labor leaders of his day, was appointed as chief envoy to China. And of course, China has wrecked our labor market over the last 30-plus years. Leonard Woodcock was the man on the scene in 1973, making sure that the skids of free trade were well greased. Then, of course, there's like Andrew Young, ambassador to the United Nations. This is just a few. He ultimately appointed 26 members to high-level positions in his government. This was the hijacking, the original hijacking that I'm talking about of the executive branch of the U.S. government. Every key position of influence that they needed to have to influence trade was dominated by members of this organization. Senator Barry Goldwater in 1979 was probably the only public figure that spoke out against the Trilateral Commission at the time. We were, myself and Professor Anthony Sutton, were writing about the Trilateral Commission back in these days. We had no contact with Barry Goldwater with our research that he would come to this conclusion. His conclusion, in other words, was independent from us. But he said in his book, with no apologies, the Trilateral Commission is international and is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control, underline, by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. Barry Goldwater obviously was clued in as to what this group was all about. His words, unfortunately, were, kind of put to the dustbin, I suppose. It was just less than a page in his book. Not too many paid attention back then, but believe me, they're paying attention now. Now, the question raised here is, how have they exercised their influence over a period of years? You have to see this to believe it. If you've never seen this, you're going to be shocked.